Will you take a Bible, please, and turn to Ephesians? And it's hard at times to tell which verse we're at, but I think we're at verse 3. And you remember verses 1 and 2 run like this, of Ephesians 2. And you he made alive when you were dead through the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. And then verse 3 runs, among these, I believe that's among the sons of disobedience, among these we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, following the desires of body and mind, and so we were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. A lot of this we know already, but it might be good just to look at it again. Among these, we all once lived in the passions of our flesh. And we've often said, I think, before, that if you didn't believe in God, there are certain things that you just naturally fall into. It would just be good common sense, If you didn't believe there was a God and you find yourself in this world and you look around you, and now there are 6 billion others in it, but even when there were only 2 billion in it, it wasn't hard to look around and think, well, now all these other people are here and they're all trying to do what I'm trying to do. Because I know I need food to keep me alive, and I know I need clothes, and I certainly need shelter to keep myself out of the weather, and they're all after the same thing. So I had better get my skates on and better get going and make sure that I get my portion of what I need. And it just stands to reason that's the way you'd think. It's all right when you have your mum and dad for a while, they provide those things, but whether they tell you or not, just your own common sense tells you there's going to come a time when I have to provide for that myself. And you certainly become aware that you'd better get whatever food and clothing and shelter you need to keep yourself alive, whatever this life is about. Just in order to stay alive, to even be able to entertain the question, what am I here for, you'll have to have food, shelter, and clothing. And it seems to me that's at the basis of almost every human being. In fact, I would say every human being who is alive. They're very aware that they have to get what they need of food, shelter, and clothing. Really, depending on what society you're brought up in, you would be anxious for either a mud hut, as good as everybody else's mud hut, or you'd be anxious for one little room in a large city, or you'd be anxious for an apartment, or you'd be anxious for a beautiful house in the suburbs. It wouldn't really matter. Somehow you would know you had to get shelter, and you had to get clothing, and you had to get food. And that is part of what Paul means when he says, among these people, the sons of disobedience, we all once lived in the passions of our flesh. First of all, epithumia is the word he uses for passion, and it can mean just desire. And the flesh can just mean the body. And therefore, the body's desires for food, clothing, and shelter are some of the very first things we see as necessary. And we know ourselves that we've had our own moments when we've realized, well, yeah, I have to get a job. Well, I have to have money. Well, I have to provide these things for myself. Nobody else is going to provide them for me. And so in that sense, we walk in, you could say, in the desires of our body, if you like to put it, We lived in those desires because we know they're very necessary and very essential. I think we've also all talked at different times of how that gets perverted. In other words, it wouldn't be so bad if we just took a sane, balanced attitude to those things and thought, yeah, well, we need them. We need them. But the fact is that we become perverted in our attitude to them. And if you say, why do you think that is? Well, I think it's because God created us in Jesus. Now, we misuse this. But I think there is in some of us, or maybe in all of us, the seed of the idea that somewhere it's possible to have no anxiety about anything. Somewhere it's possible that someone supplies these things for us. In other words, way, way deep down, maybe in the worst of us, there is something of Jesus' own confidence that, look at the birds of the air. They do not toil nor reap. And yet your heavenly Father feeds them. How much more will he feed you, O ye of little faith? And there's something inside us that says, yes, it should be possible to get all that we need of food, shelter, and clothing, and not to have to worry about it. But I don't think we take Jesus seriously. I think we just feel we need shelter, food, and clothing. And boy, if we had enough of it, we wouldn't have to worry at all. And so there sets in the bad part of the Greek word epithumia. The desire turns into what it's sometimes translated in the Bible, a lust or a desperate passion for the thing. And instead of just deciding we have to get a job to get food, shelter, and clothing, we begin to give ourselves to the whole idea of getting as much food, shelter, and clothing as we possibly can so that we won't have to depend on anybody. And there's where it begins to become a lust. And there's where we begin to get into not just meeting a need, but satisfying a desire to be like God without God. A desire to have the benefits that God has given us in Jesus, but without being weighted down or trammeled by Jesus. And I think that's what Paul is saying, that the sons of disobedience live in that kind of a life. And he says, we all once walked in those same passions of our flesh. They start off as just natural needs. And the need is not the problem. It's perfectly reasonable to have food, shelter, and clothing. But we turn it into a lust for as much food, shelter, and clothing as we can get. In fact, gradually it becomes more food, shelter, and clothing than other people have. And of course, that's what we mentioned yesterday, that seems to be taking place in, for instance, Silicon Valley especially, where so many people have become millionaires through the new .com companies that have started. And they're talking now about the problem of excessive wealth, because you have children who are now wealthy enough in themselves, because some of them are making such huge sums of the stock market, even playing with their computers, that they can have Mercedes 500 to go to school in and that sort of thing. And so they're beginning to touch the terrible problems of excessive wealth and excessive desire for more wealth. And it seems that that's what happens to us human beings. We begin to turn needs into desires that really are connected with our yearning for eternity or for the infinite possibilities of eternity. But of course, under our control, not under God's. And that's why Paul says, all of us once lived among the sons of disobedience in the passions or in the desires of our flesh. And you remember he elaborates it a little in the next phrase. He says, among these we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, following the desires of body and mind. Because it seems that then those things take over, and your body and your mind begins to dominate all the actions of your life and begins to be dominated by fulfilling those needs. So probably, there probably isn't one of us here that would not say, yes, I'm a bit startled, to tell the truth, how often I find myself thinking what am I going to eat. Or I find myself startled by thinking what a satisfaction I get out of having some special little food treat. Yes, it is true that I do find myself often following the desires of my body and my mind. And it's not just my body. My body certainly seems to enjoy the food in a way at times that may cause me a little doubt or a little concern, but my mind seems to combine with my body. My mind, I often find my mind not working on the things that it should work on, but working on silly things that really are incidental. And I'm surprised how much of my thinking goes into either how I look or what my clothes are like or how my room is or what my shelter is like. And it is startling to find that people like ourselves, who often think we're not among the sons of disobedience, yet we find ourselves following out the desires of our mind and our body and led along by them rather than directing them. And I think that's part of what Paul is saying, that we're really taking an infinite supply of these things that comes in Jesus, and we're trying to ensure that we have them apart from Jesus. And of course, that's what leads to all the problems. I mean, that undoubtedly we know is what leads to the anxiety, because we get anxious. Will we have often not enough money for today, because here we are today and we have enough money, but somehow we get on to tomorrow or the next day or the next month or the vacation or the year after, and the anxiety begins to step in about, or to set in about how much money we'll need for that, what clothes we'll need, what shelter we'll need, what food we'll need. And somehow or other, the need begins to be a dominating anxiety to us. And indeed, many of us would say that's actually where a lot of our discontent comes in, because we begin to glance at other people and we see what they have and we think, well, it would be nice to have that. And that's where a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the envy and the jealousy comes in. And it's because we take needs that are there and we turn them into lusts that dominate our lives. And it seems, the same if you we've said, how natural it is in this world where you have 6 billion other people and everybody seems to think everybody's important, and of course we ourselves think we're important. And each one of us, I think we always smile inside when we mention this because we know it's so true. Each one of us is absolutely and utterly convinced that we are unique. We think we're pretty miserable in 1,000 ways, but we do think there's not another Colleen Donahue, and there's not another Sandra Thompson, and there's not another Ernest O'Neill, there's not another Peggy Coleman. And actually there isn't. There is not another person exactly like us. But of course, we've said before, you remember one of the irritating things is nobody else seems to realize that. Nobody else seems to realize how unique we are, or they don't give us the respect that we should have. And of course, that immediately unleashes the feeling we have that they ought to realize how good we are. They ought to realize how valuable we are. And we have a worth that they haven't got. And we begin to look for that importance and that significance. And actually, in a funny way, it's right, because you are unique. But you're unique because Jesus has taken no other form exactly like yours. That's why you're unique. You're unique because you feel something of what he feels his Father's love for him is like. He feels his Father loves him because he's his only son. And we get the benefit from that because we're a unique part of him. And so we do feel that we are important, but of course we want that without Jesus. And so the result is all the striving for attention that actually embarrasses us ourselves. I mean, I don't know how about you, but I don't know how often in the past years I've been embarrassed by the way you try to draw attention to yourself. Or I try to draw attention to myself in all kinds of subtle ways. We are offended when somebody doesn't give us the attention that we think we deserve. And it's really because there's a sense in which we're the apple of God's eye that nobody else is. Just as Jesus is the apple of his Father's eye, you are a unique part of Jesus. And you're an apple in the Father's eye in a way that nobody else is. But it's in his eyes. And what we do is, we don't want that because it means we'll somehow have to depend on him or obey him, but we do want the sense of importance that that gives us. And the only place we can get it is from other people. And so then we begin to walk again in just like ordinary men, as Paul says. We begin to walk following the desires of body and mind for attention and for a sense of importance and a sense of self-esteem. And that's why those feelings are so incomprehensible to us. I mean, I'm sure you've been in the same boat. You've thought, why am I at all envious? Why am I at all jealous? Why am I at all proud of that stupid little thing? Why? And it's almost something we don't understand. We can't understand. And it really is taking something that is real, our value to our Father, as part of his Son, and we're trying to ensure that and get enough of it to give ourselves the satisfaction that can never come from anybody but the Father himself. And so I think that that's part of what Paul means when he says, for all of us, we walked among these sons of disobedience, and we lived in the passions of our flesh, following the desires of our body and our mind. And I don't know about you, but it does seem at times as if your body and your mind are almost going independent of what you want them to, or the way you want them to go. It really is like that. I thought for a while, why does he put it that way? Follow the desires of the body and mind, as if the body and mind are separate beings. But actually they are. I mean, it's almost as if they are. It's almost as if we're being dragged in a direction that we don't want to go at all. And the last one that we've often talked about is one of the things you become aware of not too far along the road here in life is that there's such a thing as death. And it's probably that, as much as anything else, that makes us feel, well, we'd better enjoy ourselves while we're here. And so it's legitimate, actually, because God's desire is for us to be happy. But to be happy in his Son, and to be happy as part of his family, and to be happy as people who possess all that he has given us. But we, of course, take that happiness and we feel, well, we better get all the happiness we can because this life is so short. Now, if we really believed and really accepted reality that we're going to be with Jesus forever, that we're going to be alive forever, then we wouldn't feel that it's short. But because we're not too sure of that, we feel it's short and we'd better pack into it everything we can. And so, I won't say who it is, but somebody here said, why do I look forward to thrills or little exciting moments? Well, I think all of us are the same. We all kind of want some excitement. We want to enjoy ourselves. And there's a wee bit away at the back of it, what I would call a kind of Irish melancholy. And I don't want to give it any other nationality's name, but you can put your own nationality to it. But it's a kind of Irish melancholy, or a kind of a feeling that life is basically sad because it's going to end, and I'd better have what happiness I can now and grab it. And somehow that, what is a legitimate need, because God wants us to be happy and intends us to be happy and intends us to live in a perpetual party all the time with him. But because we want that without him, we are trying always to achieve that on our own, by our own little manipulations. And so we often find our feelings actually being dissatisfied with just flat, steady Eddie life. And actually the truth is that in that flat, steady Eddie life and the satisfaction of living fully in that, there lies our happiness. But we feel, no, it's too dead, it's too flat. There ought to be something better. Well, there is something better, and we will enter into that as Jesus has entered into it. But at this moment, this is what God has for us, but we aren't satisfied with that, and so we want something happy. So we're always trying to arrange little treats or little parties or little exciting moments, or we all know our vacation, or TGIF. It's always something that will give us a little jump or a little kick. And of course, what that becomes is a dominating thing, as we all know, when it turns into a lust, it turns into alcohol and turns into drugs. But really, just because we're free from that doesn't mean that we do not have our own addictions that in a way we become a slave to. And I think that's again what Paul means when he says, among these sons of disobedience, we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, following the desires of our body and mind. And I always think that following, has the idea of being led by the nose. Don't you feel it at times? You almost feel, I'm being led by the nose. I mean, I don't really want those things, but I feel I ought to have them. And it's that brings some of the discontent that we have in our lives. And it's partly, strangely enough, because we are in Jesus. It's partly because we've been created in him, and we have a sense of the things that he's enjoying with his Father. And we have some sense that those things ought to be in us. But instead of going deeper into him for them, we try to produce them ourselves. And of course, that's why Paul finishes, the verse. He says in verse 3, among these we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, following the desires of body and mind, and so we were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. And it might be good just to mention to you the real meaning of that, we were by nature children of wrath. What Paul's saying is, we've been brought up in this human race. We're the sons and daughters of this human race. We're the sons and daughters of thousands of our forebears that have lived this way. And so actually we've inherited their nature. And the things that they do, we do. And of course we know it ourselves, how like our father or mother we are. And so he's saying, in a way by nature, you're like them. Even though you don't want to be like them, in a way you've inherited that nature. And in a way, you are by nature a child of wrath. Now, a child of wrath is not all bad. What does it mean? It means you're a person who was made in Jesus. And therefore you have something of Jesus inside you, as well as these other desires that are not his, as well as these desires that are for all that he has without him, as well as these godless desires that want to be God, as well as these selfish, independent desires that want all of heaven without the burden of God himself. As well as that, you have inside you Jesus' own heart and desires. And God is by that means revealing to you how wrong your other desires are. And that is part of God's wrath. Don't do that. You'll get burnt. Well, it seems like wrath. But it is only one desire and one aim. Don't do that. You'll get burnt. There's only one purpose in it. You may say, oh, what wrath. Yes, but there's only one desire, to keep the little one from not getting burnt. And there's only one reason why Jesus in you has borne the wrath of his Father. It's so that you will still be able to feel what is right and to know what is right. And yes, in a way you are a child of wrath, but the wrath has been worked out by our Father on our Savior Jesus. And the wrath is only there to let you know, son, that isn't the way to go. Daughter, that isn't the way to be. There's something better. There's something far better. In other words, we're not just children of disobedience. We're also, thank God, children of wrath. We're children who can feel in our hearts that there is a loving, trusting way to go. There is a way to be like Jesus. And God wants us to be like that. And we feel his displeasure as we compare the good desires within us with the bad ones. But we sense all the time that it's not a displeasure that wants to destroy us, but it's a displeasure that wants to end the old self and the old flesh and let the new and the beauty of Jesus spring forth. And I think that's why he says we are all, in a way, by nature, children of wrath. But children of wrath because God still cares for us. You don't show wrath to something you don't care about. You don't. If you think of it. You don't even get bad-tempered. You don't even lose your temper. You don't even, you don't let a hair be turned for something that you don't care about. So somebody tells you about something that has nothing to do with you, and it doesn't hurt you at all. You only get concerned about something that you care about or something that you want to change. And so it's probably wise for us, even to use the old word wrath, even rather than anger, because anger somehow is in our mind too tied to human expressions of anger. It's probably wise to continue to talk about the wrath of God, but to see that this wrath is just part of his love. It's part of his love that says, I don't want you to get lost. I don't want to lose you. That's why I've made you in my Son. That's why I've put my Son inside you. I want you to yield completely to him and enter into all the peace that he has and all the fulfillment that he has, and not try to fill your own needs for yourself. So I think it's something dear, The verse, I'll just read it again. Among these we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, following the desires of body and mind, and so we were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. But what he says is, we all once lived, once, and that time has passed.